Hello and welcome to the Majlis podcast, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty's current affairs talk show focusing on Central Asia. I'm Bruce Pannier, host of the Majlis and author of the weekly Central Asia in Focus newsletter. This week we're talking about climate change in Central Asia. It seems every day there's more evidence of climate change around the world. But this summer in Central Asia there have been many reports that use the words abnormal heat. And that follows last year when there was drought in Central Asia. Just how bad is the problem of climate change in Central Asia and what can we expect moving forward? To discuss all this, I am joined by Reeks Bosch from Dutch Green Business and also a consultant on integrated natural resource governance, climate change adaptation, and human resource development for the Asian Development Bank, World Bank, UN Development Program, and other international organizations. And Farouk Yusufi, director of RFERL's Turkmen service, known locally as Azatli. Thank you both for joining me, and I want to mention to our guests that you are free to add to comments of the other speaker or ask questions. Farouk, I'd like to start with you. Turkmenistan, at the best of times, is a difficult place to make a living. Most of the country is covered by the Garagum Desert, but last year and this year, the situation with heat and lack of water have been especially noticeable. Could you tell us about the situation in Turkmenistan in 2021 and this year?
Yeah, as you rightly mentioned, Bruce, it never was a good place to make a living in Turkmenistan. Even during Soviet Union, the ecology was not good there. Probably one of the worst among the Soviet republics. But especially the last few years were very harsh. According to our correspondents, drought is crippling the agriculture. The Karakum, they have this Karakum channel that crosses the country from Amudarya in the north all the way down to Ashgabat. And it is very shallow, as we are told. And frankly, the Amudarya river is also not full as it used to be. Before, when you invited me to this conversation, I spoke with a few of our correspondents to ask them like what they see, what the problems are. They say that there is no control from the government or any organization, be it local or international, when it comes to the pollution from the industry, from the plants, from different mills, and on top of that, there is other sort of pollution like landfills. Even these days, when like these past couple of days, the temperature receded a little bit, but a few weeks ago the temperatures surpassed 55 degrees centigrade, and even during those days, those massive landfills were burning. They burn. They don't know how to dispose of the garbage, and they just burn. So the situation is very, very dire. The farmers over the couple of years and this year too, they are saying that they are not able to fulfill what they call the state quota for cotton and for wheat. So it is very, very grim picture there.
Thank you. And, I should mention, too, that, of course, Turkmenistan is all the way downstream and in the southwestern corner of Central Asia. So it is in as we mentioned, the worst situation probably of any country in Central Asia. Reeks, there are studies that show that there are more hot days in the summer in Central Asia than there were 40 or 50 years ago. Glaciers are melting in the Tian Shan and Pamir Mountains in the eastern part of Central Asia. And some studies claim that Central Asia is more prone to the effects of climate change than other parts of the world. What have your observations and your research shown on this?
It's clear that extreme temperatures are going up. And they're going up quicker than the average temperatures. But the average temperature is going up 1 degree. The extreme maximum temperatures are going up, and they are expected to go up with 2-3 degrees. But at the same time, it's interesting to see that in the climate scenarios, the expectation is that the precipitation will increase. But it doesn't say that it will help, because there is a shift in precipitation to spring. And when there is rain in summer, it's coming more and more as heavy precipitation. What is also clear is that besides the climate change, we are now in a dip of the climate weather cycle. Every, let's say, around 12 years, you have a weather cycle where temperatures and precipitation are changing, and that is normal. That has related to the solar activity. But the climate change we calculated over a period of 30 years. But what is drought periods are increasing, especially in the summer droughts. The warmth periods are increasing. For the southern part, it's the extreme maximum temperatures which are endangering agriculture perhaps even more than the drought duration. Because until 37 degrees, most crops don't have a problem. But after 37 degrees, they go into stress. There is no hardly any research in Central Asia about this, but above 40, slowly you can come to a situation of irreversible stress. That means that the growth is stopping and that you don't get any production anymore. But that is something what needs severely researched for Central Asia.
I have a question about, you mentioned precipitation, and I've noticed that too over the last few years, and I'll ask Farouk about this in a minute also, but if I could ask you first, Farouk, they've had a lot more flooding, and it always comes, about the middle of spring, the latter part of spring. I've even heard some people make the case that it's not such a bad thing that there's global warming because it could lead to a third growing season. I'm not sure whether you would agree with that or not. But can you explain? So you would think in principle, if they would have more precipitation in the spring, that they would be able to still keep crops growing. But is that the case? And is extra rain, will extra precipitation compensate for melting glaciers in the mountains?
Now, what you see is that the precipitation, the snowfall, is on lower altitude. Siberian anticyclone is weakening, and that causes precipitation on a lower altitude. What you also see is that the spring or the winter cold stops earlier in spring. That means also that you get earlier spring rains. The snow melt and the spring rain are joining more and more regular. And that means that the chance on flooding is increasing. Where, for example, on the Kizilsu, Yaksu in the past, the maximum flow in the river was in end of May, June. Now it's in April. That means that the maximum flow in the river, which are rain-fed, it's now 1.5, 2 months earlier. And that is, of course, a problem for agriculture. You can't store all the water. You can partly store it in the underground by better soil preparation, low tilt. This means very limited plowing of the soil. You can infiltrate more water to the underground, but you can't hold everything. And that means that the problems with drought in summer, you can't compensate it with the spring rain. What is also visible is that in a number of areas, however, the spring starts earlier, that the night frost is taking longer. Longer in the season, you have night frost, and that means in that period you can't see it.
Okay, thank you. Farouk, I asked the same thing with precipitation. I noticed, even Turkmenistan's had these floods too. Has the government made any attempt to try to capture some of this water and hold on to it? You would figure, especially in the desert, and of course they have that big artificial lake way out in the middle of the desert. Have they been successful at reclaiming any of this water and being able to use it? And also, are they still using water for foolish projects like the golf course in Ashgabat and the fountain system that runs through Ashgabat also?
Yeah, the fountains are there. I don't know what the situation about the golf courses at the moment, but as to proper use or effective use of water, Turkmenistan was never perfect. They never learned, even during previous years when everything more or less was normal, the precipitations, everything. They were not able to effectively manage the water resources. As Reeks rightly mentioned, in recent years, the weather conditions during the springtime did not allow them to start the sowing process on time. That, of course, becomes a problem for crops like cotton and even wheat. And especially over the past couple of years, when behavior of the nature or behavior of the water resources, natural behavior of water resources were not normal, they are facing very difficult, almost solvable situation when there is no water to send to the cotton fields or wheat fields. So to answer your question, no, the Turkmenistan was not able to properly use the water, especially in the given complicated situation.
Yeah, and I want to move on to the dust storms because this is a new phenomenon in Central Asia that we haven't seen now. The one that hit a couple years ago, it picked up alkaline soil from the bottom of the dried out Aral Sea. Now, the Aral Sea, of course, we know is a man-made disaster. It's from overuse of water. Before it reached the Aral Sea, it finally led to the desiccation of the sea. But the storm that picked it up was something new, and that is not the only storm that has hit the region recently. Can you talk about the dust storms that have hit Turkmenistan and actually parts of western Uzbekistan all the way to Tashkent, in fact?
It goes all the way to Dushanbe. In the past, most dust storms, they were coming from Afghanistan. But now you get dust storms, they are forming from two sides. One side from Afghanistan, on the other side from the Aral Sea area. In average, the wind speed has indication that it's reducing, but at the same time, the extreme winds, which are causing the dust storms, are also in the west of the Central Asia are increasing. And it has also to do with the Iranian anticyclone. In the past, it was laying above the Gulf, and the mountains were protecting Central Asia from the Iranian anticyclone in summer. And now it's dumping over the mountains into the Caspian, and that is causing additional heat and also longer-term drought in summer, but also regular. It's inducing additional winds.
And this is all caused by climate change, right?
That is partly caused by climate change, but because Aral Sea area is more hot, you get also more wind. And when the vegetation is only partly covering the soil, the wind is taking up the soil and blowing it up. And when that process is rolling, then it's difficult to stop. One of the possibilities is to increase the soil cover. There are, with support of carbon sequestration, the fixating of carbon, saxaul shrubs are planted in Kazakhstan, and these kind of activities may help to reduce the dust forming.
Great, thank you. And that's going to be the second part of the show: is what can possibly be done to alleviate that. And in fact, that's a good opportunity for me to pause right here in the middle and recap that this is the Majlis podcast, and today our topic is climate change. I'm Bruce Pannier, the host of the Majlis podcast, and also the author of the weekly Central Asia in Focus newsletter. And I am joined today to talk about climate change by Faruk Yusufi, the director of RFERL's Turkmen service, known locally as Asad Lik, and Rieks Bosch from Dutch Green Business, and also consultant on integrated natural resource governance, climate change adaptation, and human resource development for the Asian Development Bank, World Bank, UN Development Program, and other international organizations. Thank you both for being here again. And let's follow up on this now. Given the situation in Central Asia, Rieks, what steps can they take that might help to alleviate the problem?
The first thing, and that's not always in the scope, is improving the use of the soil. Better soil management with increasing the organic carbon in the soil, decrease the plowing and other cultivation of the soil, low tilts. Every time you plow and you do other cultivation, you lose water. And you lose carbon. Normally, you can say about up to 1/10% of carbon you use. And the less carbon in soil, organic matter, humus, the less is the water capacity of the soil, and the less is the root depth. So that is one of the major recommendations for agriculture. The second thing is the water availability is an issue. Nowhere in the world more water is used per hectare than in Central Asia, where in the other parts of the world the netto profit from water is somewhere around $1 up to $2. In Central Asia, you speak about, let's say, from 20 cents till 40, perhaps some areas 50 cents per cubic meter of irrigation water. That means that a lot of improvements are possible, and the less you irrigate the topsoil, the less salt from the underground is coming up, and the less you have to drain the salt away from the soil.
Okay, great. Thank you. Farouk, I know that you're not an expert in farming in Turkmenistan or anything like that, but has the Turkmen government, to the best of your knowledge, reached out to any organizations to try to get some advice on what they can do to help themselves? Is this, again, this is one of the areas that's most susceptible to the effects of climate change. Have they done anything with international groups to try to improve their situation?
Yeah, from the official media, you can read that there is some sort of an interaction with international organizations like UN and others. But though from those news, you cannot get information what concretely is being done, because they are all about the official news. They are all about praising the government, praising the president for his wise policies, and that everything is wonderful in agriculture. And I know that also the USAID and other development organizations are providing some sort of assistance in water management and soil improvement. But that help is very limited. And as far as I can tell, I'm sitting from Prague, those projects are not very sustainable. They work for a few months at best. And then because there is no expertise and there is no training, or maybe a will to be trained, those projects do not get long-term sustainability. I remember a couple of years ago, the USAID provided quite an expensive equipment in Mari province to clean the water ducts and to preserve the water for agricultural purposes. But as far as I can tell now, that project, that equipment hasn't been used in any sensible way.
There are also good examples, for example, with livestock management in the half desert, where old wells were opened again, and where they were stimulated to do rotational grazing to stimulate the growth. Overgrazing is bad, but overgrazing is a matter of proper grazing. When you do proper grazing, rotational, you give the vegetation chance to rest, then you can double the productivity of the land. There are projects from UNDP where they have been focusing on herder groups, which didn't see any chance anymore to proceed. And in this way, by increasing the access to water and increasing the quality of the pasture management, of rangeland management, they can keep their way of living. So there are also good examples, but it's not always the state which is responsible for climate adaptation. Adaptation is something on local and on regional level. From the governments, they are not adapting, but they should support the adaptation at regional and local level. That can be done by technical support, financial support, by legislation, for example, rights, access to financing, but also by improved monitoring and a lot of other measures which can be taken. What I want to say is to stimulate the knowledge creation and the knowledge transfer. That is a big gap. The national knowledge or international knowledge and the access from local stakeholders to this information. CAREC is setting up climate information platform where a lot of this information also in Russian can be accessed. Also with CAREC, I did a climate risk and vulnerability assessment for all the Central Asian countries. And we did also an advice on what can be done on national and regional and local level on climate adaptation. The thing is that information should be brought to the local stakeholders. And there is still quite a gap. Development partners are doing a lot. That is on project base. The challenge will be now to develop that to a structural base.
Okay, thank you. This brings me to my next question, actually, that I wanted to ask you, Reeks, is that you work with a number of different organizations. You're a recognized specialist in this. Which countries in Central Asia do you find are most interested in reaching out to international organizations to help out to alleviate the effects of climate change? Are some more anxious to call up the ADB or EBRD or World Bank or somebody to get advice or help than others?
There's not too much difference. What is a new development is that the Ministries of Foreign Affairs, they are now approaching a common strategy for climate change adaptation for Central Asia. They have asked GIZ to guide that process. And I'm one of the persons involved in that process to develop a common strategy. So the interest for all 5 countries is very high, and it's more and more recognized. You can see that in the climate adaptation strategies and national action plans. You see it in the national determined contributions for climate change in the national communications, that the interest has been increasing strongly over the last, I'm now working for 12 years intensive in Central Asia, and that has been changed a lot. The thing is now from national strategies to transfer to a national and local process.
Let me ask you one more question then. As is true with so many aspects of Central Asia, the rapid increase in population out there plays a huge role in all these things too. It puts pressure on the land, it puts pressure on the water, electrical use, for instance, or pollution, things like that are all, the results of humans, and also the fact that we have a population that is now, I believe, about 77 million. In Central Asia, it was 50 million when it became independent in 1991. So we're going to hit the 100 million mark probably sometime in the middle of the next decade or toward the end of the next decade. How much of an extra challenge does that put, or how much extra pressure does that put on the challenges of climate change when you have a rapidly increasing population as Central Asia does?
Of course, more mouths means more food, and it will be a big challenge, especially seeing the climate change, to produce an additional 30% of food. In general, the productivity is not so high in Central Asia, agricultural productivity. The water is used inefficient. That means that there are good chances to improve that, to make more food out of water, and to make more food from land. Of course, the heat is a big issue. That means that alternative cultivations, like more vegetable grow under cover, drip irrigation, should improve the productivity, and it should improve the water efficiency. So chances are there, but they have to be worked out. You said that the donors are approached and the international financial institutions, but in the world is that more than 50% of the financing for climate adaptation has to come from the private sector. I have been at talks in the past with national associations of banks, and there is interest in the longer-term stability in supplying credits. And climate change could be a good basis, and climate change adaptation a good investment. Also because that all the projects which I'm known of on climate change adaptation, every dollar you invest, you earn it back by $3, $4, and up to $10 by prevention of losses, by additional labor, by a more stable production. So good chances are there.
And since I have the director of the Turkmen service here, Reeks, could you speak about any of the specific work that any of your organizations have done in Turkmenistan to help out the government? The government is not very forthcoming with information for its population. So anything you can tell us about help that international organizations are giving to Turkmenistan to alleviate the effects of climate change would be most welcome.
I know the best work from GIZ and from the UNDP. They're working one side with government, other sides working on the ground. I know that water efficiency and the reuse of water, of salty drainage water, is a key policy item of the Turkmen government. By not mixing the clean water with the salty drainage water, but separating them and then to reuse it for other aims is a top priority. Also, there's more and more attention for drip irrigation. But drip irrigation, some people say that's the holy grail. That helps to solve everything. You can reduce the water use by 70% and more. But it's not suitable for every crop. So for every crop and every situation, you need adapted techniques and adapted approaches.
Okay, thank you. And I just want to get one more reminder for our audience. We're coming close to the end of the show. Farouk, I wanted to bring you in. Again, this year was the first time, I think, where they actually had severe, really strict water rationing in Ashgabat. Is this true?
It was not. It was not the water rationing. I mean, they have water rationing. They have had a water rationing for a few years, but this year there were water disruptions in water supply. That was due to crumbling infrastructure. Like for days, like there were several cases, especially during those hot days when Ashgabat was left. Large parts of Ashgabat were left with no water for more than a day. Like there were several cases of that. And the recent one happened last Wednesday when, for the whole day, several districts of Ashgabat, residential districts in Ashgabat, had no water. And that's becoming more and more regular. It's not because of the heat, but it's coinciding with the heat because of the failing infrastructure. And the same is happening across the country, even in the regions. People who already did not have proper water supply, they were getting less and less possibility for the drinking water, yes. And yeah, that's becoming a very big problem, especially during hot summer days.
It's not only on hot summer days, but it's a general in Central Asia. It's estimated that 48% of the water is getting lost from the drinking water supply. And it has to do with the way in the Soviet time drinking water network was built up, mainly out of steel tubes. And they have a limited lifetime. Thanks to all these leakages, the trees in the cities are surviving. So when you stop all the leakages, then measures should be taken to water the trees, but that will be more efficient than leaving the leakages in place.
And Riks probably knows it better, but as far as I remember, Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan were two of the worst water wasters in the world. Isn't it correct?
When you look at drinking water, I can't say that. But when you look at irrigation, then Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan have the highest water consumption per hectare. And there are a lot of efforts ongoing to reduce that, but they are still in the top in the water irrigation water use. And as a result, the least is left for the Aral Sea.
We're coming to the end. Riks, I have one more question for you, but then I encourage either one of you, if you have any other comments you want to make after this question, please feel free to make them. But Riks, some people, I mentioned at the start, some people say that Central Asia is worse affected than most other parts of the world by climate change. It's in one of the worst situations at all. People are predicting a 5-degree increase in temperature by the end of this century. Is it true that Central Asia is one of the most affected regions by climate change, and are things that bad and out there at the moment? Is the outlook that bad for the future in Central Asia?
When you look at Europe, then Central Asia has a high vulnerability. But you compare it with, for example, Bangladesh and the Pacific Islands, then it's not so high. When you look at after the Paris Agreement for climate change, systematically they have been assessing the vulnerability for the different countries, but also the readiness. And when you look at the vulnerability, then Central Asian countries are all at the mid level. But when you look at the readiness to answer to the climate change, then except for Kazakhstan is just above the average. For the rest, all the 4 countries are quite low with their readiness. There's a change ongoing, but still a long way to go.
Great, thank you. Okay, and Reeks or Farouk, either one of you have any comments you want to make or questions you want to ask before the end of the program?
Yeah, I wanted to ask Reeks. Reeks, you said that the readiness is low on the part of the 4 Central Asian countries, including Turkmenistan. What can be done to improve that readiness, to increase that readiness, given the reality or given the ability of the Turkmen government, at least the part of the Turkmen government, who could do something about changing the situation?
The change should come in on local and regional level. But what you see is that Tajikistan, Turkmenistan have a climate change adaptation strategy, but all the countries, they struggle with the fact that there is no harmonized approach where national level is supporting regional level and local level, or where regional level, district level is supporting local level and private initiatives. These vertical cooperation needs severely to be strengthened. Like when I was in Tajikistan, they said to me, government is only asking information, and then they make a decision and they send it to us. That was a typical example from that national policies and the regional and local involvement needs to be strengthened to be effective in climate change adaptation. And only by including the private financing from private business, from local stakeholders, and combine them with the national possibilities and international support, then the climate change adaptation will be effective. By the way, one of the most effective ways in investments in climate change adaptation is improved information on weather, on climate, and on successful adaptation, which are stimulating others to replicate. Karing is doing a lot of efforts to make the information accessible, but to make it accessible and to bring it to the floor, there are big steps are still needed. But the common, let's say, knowledge bank development is a very positive step forwards.
I just also wanted to mention that if you remember last year, there was this big report in Bloomberg about the methane emissions. And after that, the current president, who was at the time the deputy prime minister, he rushed to participate in the Glasgow meeting and said like his country was ready to take on this problem and solve this problem. And even after that, the methane emissions, Turkmenistan remained, according to the media organizations who follow this issue, remain one of the worst methane emitters in the world.
Yeah, the interesting thing is that with the new satellites, especially the European satellites under the Copernicus program, we can now measure quite low concentrations. And it shows up that methane levels, which is 100 times stronger climate gas as CO2, which is the most discussed, it's leaking much more than what we expected. There is also came Turkmenistan with the gas production out that there is more leakage, much more leakage than expected. Australia is now, based on this information, forced to recalculate their climate footprint. And it's good that these techniques now are available to understand where are the issues and where you can invest the best. In general, I can't say what is the relation between climate change and with pollution. What is very clear is the relation between land degradation and climate change. You can easily say that land degradation is increasing the impact of climate change easily with a factor 3 till 5 times. I did pilot studies in a number of areas in Central Asia. Every time this kind of numbers are coming up. Land degradation is increasing the chance on mud flows. It's less water goes into underground. More water is evaporating. Less water for the rivers, and more chance for landslides when it's combined with heavy rain. So a lot of interaction between disaster risks of let's say hazard risk, which can then turn into a disaster induced by land degradation and further stimulated by climate change.
Okay, well, thank you both very much. And I'm sorry we're at the end of our program. We don't want to run too long, but I appreciate comments and insights from both of you. Today's guests were Riek Bosch and Farouk Yusufi. Thank you very much, gentlemen. I appreciate your being on the show today. A big thank you to my producer, Nathan Schumacher, who's in Washington, D.C. And a reminder that you can subscribe to the Majlis podcast or Central Asia in Focus newsletter by visiting RFERL's website at rferl.org. Thank you very much, and we'll be back next week. Bye-bye.